This is Julia with iCadenza, and I'm here with violinist Stefan Jackiw, who is here on tour in Southern California, and we're so thrilled to be talking to you today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Well, my first question for you is, you've performed across the world on some of the most preeminent stages, but I want to talk about how it all started for you. I know you're from Boston. How did you first get involved in music?
Well, I started playing the violin sort of by chance. On my 4th birthday, some of my parents' family friends gave me as a birthday gift a tiny violin that their kids had outgrown. And my parents are not musicians, but they love music. And prior to that, they had taken me to a lot of concerts, and I'd heard a lot of recordings being played in the house. And now that I had this little violin lying around, my parents thought, wouldn't it be fun if I started taking lessons? So I enrolled in Suzuki lessons at a music school nearby, and that was that. Just kept at it.
And so your family is not a musical family?
Not a musical family. Music loving. Mm-hmm. But and I think that's actually been a really nice balance for me. They understand music, they appreciate music, and they understand the commitment that music requires. But they obviously have lives outside of music. They're actually both scientists. They're both physics professors. So in raising me, they stress the importance of academic life and having interests outside of music. So although I was serious about music, it wasn't the only thing I did. I went to regular schools, and I had lots of friends who weren't necessarily musicians. So I think that made for a very well-balanced upbringing. And also, when I did decide to kind of jump in to music full-time, I was sure that this is what I love doing more than anything else. And it wasn't just sort of something that happened by default, because that was always the only thing I did.
And when did you decide to jump into music full-time?
Well, I began performing relatively late. I mean, it seems that it is the case that in violin there are a lot of people, or not a lot, but some people who start performing at a really, really young age, and I was not one of them. I guess I started performing professionally with some regularity when I was about 17. And so that was towards the end of high school, and at that point I knew that this is what I wanted to do. But actually, I even remember that when I was 8 years old, I performed a movement of the Mozart Third Violin Concerto with a youth orchestra in Boston. And I remember preparing for that concert and being so involved and so passionate about preparing that 8-minute movement.
That's a huge task for an 8-year-old.
That is a huge task for an 8-year-old, but it didn't seem scary for me at the time. It seemed really fun because I loved what I was doing. I loved that piece. To this day, that's still one of my favorite pieces. And I remember thinking back then that this is more fun and more of an emotional rush than anything else I've ever experienced. So although I was only 8 back then, and it was still a long time before I started playing concerts on a regular basis, I knew back then that this is what I wanted to do.
Amazing.
Well, I feel very lucky that I found my calling early on.
Absolutely, and that it's working out for you.
Yeah, I'm tremendously fortunate that this has been working out for me, and I get to do what I love as my job.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about college, because you chose to go to Harvard University, which is not necessarily the world's top conservatory. Why did you choose to go to such an academically driven school?
Well, as I mentioned, I went to a regular high school, actually a very rigorous academic high school, and I loved it. I loved studying things besides music and being around people who had a wide variety of interests, some of which had nothing to do with music. And when it came time to go to college, I wanted to kind of keep going in that direction. I knew by that point that I wanted to play the violin professionally, but I felt that I would miss out on the great experiences I had in high school if I went to a conservatory. And on top of all of that, I loved the teacher I was studying with in high school, a man by the name of Donald Weilerstein, who's a great musician and great violinist. And he taught back then and still teaches today in the Boston area. So I knew that I wanted to attend a liberal arts school in the Boston area where I could keep studying with him. And with those kind of requirements, Harvard was sort of the natural choice. And I was definitely not the only serious musician at Harvard. While I was there, I met many other serious instrumentalists and composers. And of course, if you look at the musical alums of Harvard, they have a really distinguished list, like, of course, Yo-Yo Ma and John Adams and Alan Gilbert. But those are just a few of the excellent musicians who have come out of Harvard. And I had a really wonderful time there. I met, as I said, other people who were very serious about music. And I also met people who had no interest in music and were passionate about other things. And just that the level of commitment to whatever their passions are was very inspiring, because you get students there who are incredibly motivated and incredibly hardworking, and very resourceful and very entrepreneurial. And that, whether it's in music or in theater or in sports or in literature or whatever, is a very eye-opening experience and very inspiring.
Who would you say have been your biggest influences? You noted your high school and college teacher. Have there been any other people that have really particularly influenced how you play? I
think certainly my violin teachers when I was growing up have shaped who I am as a musician. I think also my parents, of course, have shaped me. I think parents always shape their kids, but their love of music combined with, well, it's interesting for me because my parents are people who love music but don't necessarily know that much about music. So it's interesting to get their viewpoint on a concert or on a performer or on a piece of music, because these are, I guess you could say, your typical serious concert goers, people who might not have any musical training but who love music and who go to a lot of concerts. And it's interesting to hear how they respond to music and respond to performances, because it kind of gives me an idea of what the people who come to my concerts think and what speaks to them. So definitely my parents have influenced me. And these days, I mean, I don't really have a teacher anymore, so I would say I'm influenced by the other musicians who I work with. Whether it's pianists or other string players who I play with in chamber music, or conductors, or even orchestras. Most of the time I take away something valuable from musical collaborations. Whether it's a new specific idea about a piece that I've played before, and playing it with someone new kind of opens my eyes to a new aspect of the piece. Or maybe it's a broader sense of how to think about music, or how to think about the role of music in society in an even broader way, or how to build audiences. I find that I'm constantly learning more and more. And also now that I no longer really have a teacher, I seek out these, external inspirations maybe even more actively, because that's how I learn these days.
So what is the role of music in society?
What is the role of music in society? Well, I mean, the role of art in society, it's I think, comes down to a way for people to express the human condition, and to express, I guess in music, express what maybe can't be expressed in words, or maybe in a different way, expressing feelings of hope and loss, and questioning what our lives are all about. And I think some composers also question their own mortality through music. So I think the role of music, brings joy, and I won't say it can bring happiness, but kind of elicits emotional responses from people, and for that it's very valuable. And also it's a way for people to grapple with life's difficult questions. And that's certainly one of the roles that it plays for me.
Let's talk about your career, the career aspect of being a musician and a violinist at your level. What is it like having so many concerts, with such regularity? And in particular, lately, you've actually filled in. You've done some prominent performances, filling in very last minute for performers. What is that like?
Well, the first part of the question about what's it like to play so regularly, I think there are wonderful parts of it. There's something really amazing about playing one piece, if you go on tour with that piece, playing it 10 times in a row. because no matter how much you practice a piece in the practice room and study it on your own, there's something about performing it on stage over and over that gives you an understanding of the piece and an understanding of what it takes to play this piece convincingly that it's hard to get in any other experience. Also, playing the same piece with many different orchestras and different conductors is a very interesting experience because you are the constant, but they create new atmospheres and new situations and new ways of thinking about music, so actually you change too, and your thoughts about the piece change. In terms of filling in last minute, I mean, it can be very exciting. It can be very stressful.
What is the preparation like? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I've had a few situations where I literally only found out 48 hours before the first concert, 24 hours before the first rehearsal. And a situation like that, I guess first when you get the phone call, you have to decide, all right, do I know this piece well enough to do it? And then if you decide that you do know the piece well enough, then a lot of it is sort of a mental game, just telling yourself, you know what, you know this piece, you've practiced it in the past for other concerts, as much as you possibly can. You've thought about it an enormous amount. You have something convincing and personal to say about it. Trust yourself and just, play your heart out. And most of the time that works.
It is such a mental game, isn't it?
It is, I think, for all performers, and it's very much a mental game. And I think actually for being an instrumentalist who plays music that other people have written, to do it well requires a tricky balance of a lot of confidence and also a lot of humility. Mm-hmm. Because confidence, if you're going out and playing in front of 2,500 people, a piece that all the greatest violinists have already played and recorded, why bother playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto yet again? Right. And I think the only reason to do it is if you feel that you have something new and personal to say, and that your life experiences and who you are have come together, and also your preparation to form an interpretation that is worth hearing and new, even though the Tchaikovsky has been played hundreds of thousands of times. But just a lot of self-confidence is not enough. I think you have to have a lot of humility, because you are, if you're an instrumentalist, recreating someone else's creation. The composer has written the work, and you're really kind of a vessel through which the music is going to be presented and expressed. And first and foremost, you have to respect the composer's intentions and markings and wishes, and that is the number one thing that has to be at the forefront. And when you're on stage performing, it's not about you; it's about the piece of music. So that's a tricky thing, feeling that you have something important and worthwhile to say and to be heard, but also recognizing that you're not the main event.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go through making those calls? How do you decide what it is that you want to communicate in a piece when you're first working on it?
Well, I think I try to sort of address or think about bigger issues, like what is the main message of this piece? Is this a message of hope or despair or joy or struggle or love? If you take a composer like Mozart, who is one of the composers who I love playing the most, his music is so human. And of course, when people think of Mozart, maybe the first genre they think of is opera, but even his instrumental music is so dramatic in the sense that you can almost hear the different characters interacting. And I think in performances of that, the goal is to sort of bring these characters to life and really bring out these human qualities. So I try to figure out what is special about this piece and bring that to the forefront. And also, I think about, what does this piece say to me? Because after all, I'm the one performing it. And how do I respond to this piece? Why do I love this piece? Why do I think this piece is special? And I try to express that through my playing too. So I wouldn't say that I sort of have a set kind of routine of how to come up with an interpretation, because that feels a little kind of stiff. I think it's a very fluid process of studying the score a lot, reading about the composer, knowing about the composer's life, listening to works besides the work in question. You know, if you're studying the Beethoven Violin Concerto, listening to Beethoven quartets. If you're studying the Sibelius Violin Concerto, listening to Sibelius symphonies. Maybe even visiting Finland, because his music is so, you know, tied to the Nordic landscape. If you're studying Mozart, listening to his operas, reading his letters. All of that comes together in some way to kind of be a mix of your own feelings about the piece and your conveying the composer's wishes.
Okay, and then if you would take us through a performance experience with you. So, what do you do to prepare for a performance that day? What is your pre-performance routine?
The pre-performance routine day. Let me say that again.
Well, let's do both.
Okay.
You know, that day, do you take the day off?
Well, let's see. I pretty much believe that the preparation should be finished well before the day of the performance. It's not a good idea to have to cram a couple hours before performance, because then you haven't done your homework in advance. So I usually don't practice that much the day of the performance. However, if I have a lot of repertoire, then sometimes I'll even practice pieces that aren't the piece that I'm playing that night. Maybe I'll look at a piece that I have to prepare for the following week. And that, I think, is actually healthy, because it keeps variety in your mind and keeps your fingers limber rather than just practicing one thing over and over again. If it's a concerto performance, there's usually a dress rehearsal in the morning, so I have to wake up early for that. And then I'm a big believer in napping before a concert so that I feel fresh for the concert. And in terms of long-term preparation before a concert, I think having done this for a few years, I have a pretty clear sense of how much time I need to prepare something. I mean, yes, in a sense, nothing is ever completely prepared, because it's a never-ending process. You can always practice a phrase 1,000 more times or think about a new way of playing a passage. But in terms of getting the technique securely down, I kind of somehow know how much time I need and always plan accordingly with plenty of preparation time. And I'm a big believer also in running through concertos with piano before doing it with orchestra, because like performing with orchestra gives you experience that you can't replicate in a practice room, playing through the piece with an orchestral reduction at the piano gives you preparation that you can't quite replicate by yourself, you know, without that backup. So I do that a lot, playing with piano. And if it's a recital or chamber music program, then obviously rehearsing a lot with the people you're going to play with.
Okay, so you took your nap.
I took my nap.
Arrived at the venue.
Arrived at the venue. I usually arrive at the venue about an hour before the start of the concert. I like to play on the stage right before they open the house to the audience. This sounds kind of vague, but I find that in every space there's something about finding your sound and being comfortable with how you yourself sound to yourself in the hall. And some halls are very easy to play in and have great acoustics, and you feel like you sound great in those halls. Other halls are sort of average, and some halls are terrible, where you have to really scrub away for minimal returns. And kind of making peace with whatever venue you're about to play in is, for me, an important part of the pre-concert ritual.
That's fascinating.
And once I feel comfortable with being on stage, then I feel fine going back to my dressing room, waiting for the overture to finish and walking out and doing it, because I sort of feel at home on stage already. And it's a little more difficult if I can't quite remember from the morning's rehearsal how it felt to be out there, what the sound was like, and then have to sort of walk on cold and play. So I like to get there with plenty of time to do that. And then once I'm actually on stage,
any good luck things you do right before you get on stage?
No, I'm not very superstitious that way. Yeah. I don't really have, like, you know, you see a lot of these athletes who have a very set routine. I'm not really like that. I just sort of, in that sense, I'm not very neurotic.
So then you're performing, you were saying?
While I'm performing, you know, hopefully by then I've prepared enough that technical issues are not on the mind. One can sort of really focus on the music that's happening around you and responding to what the other musicians on stage are doing. For me, the most rewarding concerto experiences are when it actually feels like chamber music, when I'm really listening to the orchestra and I can feel that they're really listening to me, and that I'm really responding to the conductor and that he's responding to me, and that we're all sort of inspiring each other to do something spontaneous and special. And that's always the most fun, and I think yields the most organic, musically organic result.
Mm-hmm. Now, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing you perform live just yet, but I'm sure I'll have the opportunity. I have watched some YouTube videos of you performing, and what I found really striking is that your eyes are closed almost 99% of the time. It's really amazing. You know, it really sounds like you are, it seems like you are really listening for what you were talking about just now, you know, the combination of the sound, and I think it's just really amazing, and you really seem to be very much in the world of the music. Are you still engaged, and I guess my question is, are you ever worried about going too far with that experience?
I mean, for me, it's all about
the connection to the, you know, to what you're actually.
For me, I mean, it's not a conscious thing closing my eyes when I play. I try to do whatever it takes to be as immersed and to embody the music as much as possible, and to really pour out every single thought and feeling and response that I have towards whatever I'm playing, from whatever I'm playing. And I mean, I'm also very aware that I'm not playing just for myself. I'm trying my hardest to communicate what I feel and what I think about a piece, and also what I think the composer's intentions were to a listener. So I'm very aware that this is not just something that I do for myself, that you're trying to relay or convey something. In terms of going too far, sure, there have been some performances where you almost feel like the experience was so intense that you almost felt like you lost control. But in some ways, I think that's a really wonderful thing, where the experience was so powerful for you that it almost felt overwhelming. And the goal of practicing hours and hours and hours and doing all this prep work is so that even when you are at that brink of it's just too intense and that you almost lose control, you still have enough practicing under your belt, kind of money in the bank, that there are these reserves that you can draw on that let you go to that brink.
Like a muscle memory.
Yeah, like a muscle memory, so that you can really immerse yourself in the passage and not have to worry, okay, I have to remember to do this with my hand so that it comes out cleanly. And for me, as a listener, the concerts that I attend, the ones that I feel the most moved by and the most convinced by are the ones where nothing feels careful and nothing feels like the performer is holding the music or the experience at an arm's length. But where they're just sort of, they and the music have fused as one. And there are some performers who it feels like their life is on the line while they play it, like their entire life depends on expressing as strongly as possible what they feel about this music. And as a listener, that's just incredibly moving and incredibly thrilling to witness.
Absolutely. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of repertoire choices, in many ways one can say that you've been a very serious artist in terms of your choices. How do you go about choosing what you want to play, and how much say do you really have?
Well, in recitals, that's a very sort of, in some ways, the most personal statement of who you are as a musician, because you can form the whole program, and it's not just one piece, it's sort of a journey. And you start with one composer and kind of lead the audience through a musical trip. And that's always exciting, coming up with interesting new programs, and maybe sometimes finding that common thread that ties all the pieces together. And for concerti, obviously I don't have a say in what the entire program is because I'm a guest. And sometimes they ask what concerto I'd be interested in playing, and then I give them a list of several concertos that I'm either always love playing or particularly keen on playing at that moment. And sometimes they say, we're doing an all Beethoven program, in which case there's no choice, and it has to be the Beethoven Violin Concerto. There have been times where, you know, I want to be careful and not just play any piece that I'm asked to play, but play pieces that as I said about, you know, the importance of believing that what you have to say is new and not necessarily just unique, but personal, and that you have a reason for performing the piece. And if there is a piece, for example, that I don't necessarily feel that close to, or felt that I haven't lived with long enough that I feel that I want to perform it, sometimes you pass up opportunities. And I think that's sometimes a tough decision, but it's important to kind of not just perform just for the sake of performing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the promotional aspect of pursuing your career. And we were talking earlier about an ensemble that you're a part of in Korea called Ensemble Ditto. And in many ways, the promotional side of the process of getting the word out about your ensemble, while you do play really serious classical music, the promotional side is very, very much in the vein of pop. And I wonder how you went about deciding to do that, and what that process is like, and you know, what lessons can presenters here in the United States take from the success of that?
Well, first I have to say that Ensemble Ditto was not my idea. I joined in its second year, so I didn't really have anything to do with the creation of Ensemble Ditto. But I joined Ensemble Ditto in 2008. So this coming summer, we pretty much only play during the summers, will be my 4th year with them. And basically, what Ensemble Ditto is it's 4 musicians, it's a piano quartet. And we play serious classical music, not easy listening or watered down classical music. Our last tour was, we did the Kodai duo, a Dochnani serenade. We did Schumann and Brahms piano quartets, and then with a guest we did the Trout piano quintet, and we also did Dvorak piano quintet and Beethoven Opus 59 3 quartet. So, you know, not easy listening at all. No. But we're marketed in a way that not only makes us accessible to younger people, but makes it exciting and attractive for younger people. And what does this mean? Well, first of all, great headshots. For example, the people who present us hire excellent photographers to take really flattering, promotional materials for us. There even is sort of a classical music video where it's us performing serious music, but filmed in a cool way.
What does that mean?
There's a clip of us performing the Dvorak piano quintet, and it looks really well done. It looks like it was done with a professional videographer. It's not like a grainy backstage video. It just looks very, very slick and well done. But at the same time, it's playing that we're proud of. And all this marketing, basically, the purpose of it is to get people who maybe are not yet lovers of classical music into a seat for a concert. And from that point on, it's like any other concert. We come out, we play serious classical music repertoire, and some people, I think, are introduced to classical music that way and love it. And I'm sure there are some people who come for the first time and maybe aren't moved by it, maybe never come see us again, maybe never see a classical music concert again. But there are some people who hear classical music for the first time because of this group, and then seek out other ways in which they can experience classical music. A lot of the people who come to these concerts find me on Facebook, and I keep in touch with some of them, and it's really gratifying to see some of them who maybe have never been to a classical music concert. After seeing us, they post on Facebook that they're going to see the Alban Berg String Quartet perform a Beethoven cycle. And, they maybe wouldn't have gone to that concert, or maybe wouldn't be interested in Beethoven quartets if they hadn't come to see us. So I think marketing is very important, and it's important that it doesn't get in the way of what we do as artists, but if it helps us, I think it's something we should embrace. And I think almost everyone in classical music is aware of this, that we have to find ways of preserving the integrity of the art form, but also keeping it exciting and culturally relevant for young people.
What do you think about crossover?
I haven't done really much crossover myself. I think if it's crossover that's well thought out and something that the performer really believes in, and if it's a intelligent, creative performer, it can be really wonderful. Also, there's crossover out there which seems mindless and kind of doesn't seem to have that much thought behind it. So I think there is some crossover out there that's really excellent. So I think it's sort of hard to make a blanket statement about crossover. I think like any sort of art form, there are good parts of it and there are parts that aren't so good.
Now, as a student at Harvard, you saw yourself as an ambassador for the classical arts and getting people to really be exposed to it and attend concerts. What was that experience like, and how do we reach out to young people?
Well, I think ambassador is maybe too illustrious a title. I was in no way a self-anointed ambassador of classical music, but I did a lot. I played a lot on campus, and I had a lot of friends who were musicians, and we put on a lot of concerts. And I had a lot of friends who were not musicians, and I would sort of recruit them to come hear me or hear some of my friends in a classical music concert on campus. And it was very interesting to see what kind of responses my recruitment efforts got. Quite often I would hear my friends say, "Oh, I would love to come, but I don't really know that much about classical music, and I would feel kind of awkward being there, and I feel a little out of place, and it's not really something I'm familiar with." And it always struck me that, these people who are, for the most part, very intelligent, culturally curious people would feel that way about going to an artistic event, because these are people who will go to a kind of esoteric exhibit at a modern art museum, or maybe see an independent film, even if they know nothing about filmmaking, and not feel awkward being there and also enjoy it. So what is it about classical music that kind of makes them feel this way? And I don't know exactly what the answer is. I think maybe in the past, classical musicians and also the culture around classical music has made classical music into this rarefied art form that has to be kind of handled with care and put behind a glass and just appreciated like a museum artifact, which it really isn't. It's a very visceral experience, and when you think about Mozart writing Magic Flute, that was a vaudeville act for the commoners. That was almost pop music at the time. And, of course, music has to be accorded respect, but I don't think it should be viewed as something that only the few educated in music, initiated into the club, can enjoy, because everyone loses in that situation. And I think presenters are really aware of this, and like this Ensemble Ditto thing, are finding ways of making music more accessible and finding new outlets for classical music. I mean, now it seems that every city has some sort of club-like venue where classical music is being played, whether it's in a cafe, or maybe the most famous example is in downtown Manhattan, Le Poisson Rouge, right, where you get classical music concerts in a very hip setting. And I've been to a few concerts there, some traditional classical music, some cutting edge, totally atonal experimental stuff. And both concerts had full houses and attentive listeners who were having a really fun time. And I think that's wonderful. And I always think it's a pity when you go to a standard concert hall and someone shushes you for clapping at the wrong moment or dressing in a way that they think is inappropriate for a serious classical music concert, because that's only excluding people, and no one wins from that sort of attitude.
Yeah. And you're also really active on social media and engaging with audiences through that. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, I think when audience members go to concerts, a lot of the time the only information they have about the person up there playing their hearts out is their official bio, which lists their accomplishments and where they were trained. And of course, that's sometimes interesting, but also there's a human side of the performer that sometimes we don't really have access to. And I think the nice thing about social media is it puts a face to that person on stage and gives music enthusiasts like an idea of what the day-to-day life is and what the routine is and what this person's silly passions are outside of music, or maybe serious passions are outside of music. And so, I'm on Twitter, which, at least for me, is a pretty frivolous tool. I don't use it for really serious audience building. I think there are some people who use it sort of more assiduously. I also have a Facebook fan page where I post reviews that maybe I'm proud of, or interesting other musical concerts that I've attended, or sometimes stuff completely unrelated to music. And I also mentioned that I try to keep in touch with concert goers on Facebook if they write to me and say, they've really enjoyed my performance of such and such, what other recordings or pieces by this composer would they recommend? And I always write back, and I appreciate that they took the initiative first to come to one of my performances and support me, and then also to get in touch with me, and that they're curious about listening to other sorts of music. And I think that's wonderful, and I want to kind of do my part to keep that going. Another thing that's really nice is I've done quite a bit of outreach among younger people, especially younger musicians. I do master classes. Sometimes I listen to youth orchestras, or maybe I coach serious individual, middle school or high school, or maybe even college students. And sometimes they write to me afterwards. I recently did a master class, and one of the students wrote to me. She was a senior in high school and had questions about what path to take, for the next step, going to college, about whether conservatory or going to a regular liberal arts school. And these are questions that I thought about and grappled with not so long ago when I graduated from high school. So I think in that way, it's nice for performers to keep in touch with students also.
Do you think that for a performer, it's important to use social media as a promotional tool?
I think it can't hurt. In terms of career building, sure. There seem to be some very successful, very famous performers who don't do any social media work at all. And kudos to them for being able to do that. But I think, especially for younger generation people, the world is changing, and now that we have these new tools of keeping in touch with people and drawing attention to classical music, it'd be a pity not to use them. And I think, as I was saying about Ensemble Ditto, if you believe in the music that you're playing, you should use whatever means necessary to generate interest and to call attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to use whatever tools we have.
And getting back to what you're doing, you are doing so much these days. You're really on the road so much of the time. What is that experience like? Just being, this summer you'll be away for 4 months.
Right. It's tiring sometimes, a lot of traveling. Sometimes it's a little sad living out of a suitcase for months on end. Sometimes it can be really interesting traveling to different cities. One of the tours that I'm doing this August is going to take me to Vietnam and Malaysia, places that I've never been to before, in Thailand. So being in a profession that requires a lot of traveling can be actually quite exciting. I think also I find myself looking for ways to keep a routine while I'm on the road from hotel to hotel. And for me, actually, that has been in the form of running. I really enjoy running, and I have not yet completed a marathon, but hopefully soon.
When you're free.
When I have a spare 4 hours, right.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a regular thing that I can do wherever I travel. All I need is a pair of sneakers. And it's nice to have that sort of grounding you. Mm-hmm. So parts of traveling can be really fun. Parts of, sitting for hours at an airport is not as fun, but every job has the hassles that come with it. So I think in the grand scheme of things, I have quite little to complain about when it comes to that.
Of course. So looking back at your burgeoning career, what do you think were some of the things that really compelled you to, or, positioned you for success? And we should mention, too, that, you did not just go to Harvard, you also got an artist diploma at NEC.
Right.
The New England Conservatory of Music at the same time, which I think is quite a feat.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wonder, what is the effect? We spoke about the reasons why you chose to go to Harvard, but what was the effect on your career of going to Harvard?
Well, the first part of the question was,
what do you think has really contributed? What are some of the major factors that have contributed to your success in terms of your career?
So what are the major factors that have contributed to my success? I think I think a lot about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and why I'm playing this piece and what I have to say about this piece. And I hope that comes across in my performances and recordings, that I have a reason for doing what I'm doing and that I've thought a lot about it. And I think also I'm quite a curious person. I try to, learn new things all the time, and either directly or indirectly, that sort of, I think, improves me or makes me grow as a musician. And what you also were asking, how has going to Harvard and that path sort of changed me or affected me as a musician?
And in terms of your career path.
In terms of my career path also.
Did it close any doors at the onset?
Did it close any doors at the onset? Maybe if I had kind of jumped headfirst into music earlier on, maybe I would have started performing earlier. But with the path that I chose, those doors were never open. So I don't feel like I really lost anything there. I wasn't ready to start performing when I was 8, 9, or even 13. And looking back on that, I don't regret that at all. I don't wish that I had had an earlier start, because ultimately, when you perform it, you draw upon your life experiences and what you've been exposed to in your life and what your thoughts are about your experiences. And I don't think I had enough to say when I was 8 to be performing full time. So I'm glad that I waited / was made to wait and didn't have concerts when I was that young. In terms of going to a regular high school and an academic university as opposed to a conservatory, I don't feel that one path is the right path and that it's better than the others. I have friends, and of course there are also great musicians out there who went to conservatory and who were homeschooled and who are incredibly thoughtful, intelligent, and creative musicians. And then there are some musicians who go on this sort of on the path of being well-rounded and being exposed to a lot and maybe their music making doesn't speak to me. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say that one is good and the other is not as good. I think it really depends on the person. And I think you really have to be someone who is seeking out new inspiration all the time and also always seeking to improve, whether it's improve your understanding or your knowledge of a composer, or if it's improving your expertise on the instrument, mm-hmm. finding new colors, finding new ways of creating new sounds, finding, more haunting tone or maybe a more kind of transcendent tone for a very special moment in music. It's a lifelong search, and I think the greatest musicians are those who never sort of rest on their laurels, but are always sort of finding new ways of expressing themselves.
Is there anything that you wish you'd known, when you were in high school?
Anything that I'd wish I had known? Let's see. I guess in high school, I had a few very spaced out concerts. So I would practice very hard for one concert, and then I would have, several months off to prepare for the next concert. And I think that was completely natural because I was doing a lot of other stuff too, being in school. But when I started performing more regularly, it was a little bit of a shock at first. Oh my God, I have to have all these different pieces ready essentially simultaneously. And that was something that I wasn't really trained for. I sort of just focused on one piece and played it as well as I could for a while and then moved on to the next one. So that sort of took a little getting used to. And I think there are ways of maybe training for that where you're forcing yourself to juggle a lot of repertoire simultaneously. And I sort of had to learn that on the fly. But it's worked out, and I figured out a way to make that work for me. But that was a little tricky, and maybe I wish I had been forced to do that a little more when I was a kid. But besides that, I'm pretty pleased with I feel comfortable with the path that I took. And I think most importantly of all for me, I don't question whether, I'm doing music because I love it more than anything else, because I tried other stuff. And I know that I love this more than anything else.
That's incredible. Does anything still scare you?
Sure. I still get nervous performing. It's a daunting thing playing for all those people. And sometimes playing a new piece for the first time. I remember the first time I performed the Beethoven concerto, which is the pinnacle of the violin concerto repertoire. And it was actually quite scary. Because you walk out there and you have this mountain of a piece in front of you, and it's an incredible emotional journey, and emotionally very taxing, and also physically very taxing, and technically very taxing. And there's so much tradition and history behind the piece. All the great musicians have spent a lifetime thinking about the piece and polishing and honing their interpretation of a piece, and you're out there doing it for the first time. That's a little bit scary, but everyone has a first time, and you have to take that plunge at some point or another. So only thing you can do is do your best and suck it up.